I'm recording, and I'm looking for the sharing screens here. Okay, just 1 or 2 seconds of presenting myself. My name is Ernesto van Peborgh. I have 20 years of experience in the extractive investment banking industry. I managed private equity for 20 years. Among my clients was Goldman Sachs Partners Fund, the most extractive money out there. And for the last 15 years, I've been trying to construct knowledge commons using pre-blockchain technologies. My question is, there is a DNA of life, and can we code with the DNA of life? And I think that is possible. My partner in this project, called Regendesigners, is John Fullerton. He, as me, was 20 years in the investment banking industry. He was director of JP Morgan's, of the derivative department. He created the international derivatives department for JP Morgan. And he went through a very profound change in his life after 9/11, and he created the Capital Institute think tank, where he published a number of papers, but his proposal is we reimagine finance as if it were aligned with the natural laws and principles of living systems. And when we became partners, reimagining was too small. I think with his work, he reimagined that. And my proposal is to redesign economics and finance as if it were aligned with the patterns and principles of living systems. But he also has a proposal that this transformation will come from collective efforts. And I think today the technology permits coming together in order to create that energy field, in order to redesign this from a living system theory. And I won't go into the details, but we're going to have a follow-up conversation on the concepts of autopoiesis, coined by Umberto Maturana and Felipe Varela. That means self-creation. And aphanipoiesis, that is a concept that Nora Bateson called, the daughter of Gregory Bateson, that is this unseen way of bringing forth and making. And Afani means unseen, and crypto means unseen. And I think today we have the possibility of combining both the self-organizing creative process with this unseen technology that has emerged. So holistic system theory economics defines regenerative economics as the application of the natural laws and patterns of systemic health, self-organization, self-renewal, and regenerative vitality to the design of social economic systems. And this is based on 8 principles that John Fullerton coined. And I would like to explain these principles with the fragility of life. That is the seed that found these 8 principles in order to thrive. And these principles, the first one is, it's innovative, adaptive, and responsive. It's adaptive to seasonalities, adaptive to dampness, it's adaptive to dryness, but it's responsive, it's ever thriving, and it honors community and place. This is the place where it's going to set its roots, and this is what the place it honors. And it also has this principle of edge effect abundance. At the level of the roots, there's all this mycelium that creates the possibilities of life for insects and fungi, but also eventually at the flower level, the abundance of insects and birds spreading the pollen and the seeds. It views wealth holistically. The purpose of this eclectic seed is to create a forest. Right? It views wealth holistically. The purpose inside its DNA is to create an ecosystem. It has empowered participation with everything it touches. It's in a right relationship with the setting. It has robust circulation of oxygen, information, nutrients, dampness, and it's seeking balance in itself with the wind, with the whole ecosystem. So there's this process of emergence that comes from this DNA that is in the seeds of life. And I think today we have the capacity to capture the emergence of knowledge, the emergence of interaction of people through networks. I had the blessing of sitting in a train for a 4-hour trip with Elinor Ostrom, Nobel laureate, that she resolved the tragedy of the commons, but she was working on this new book, Knowledge as a Commons. We humans have created in the last 2 decades the capacity of creating knowledge commons, knowledge pool resources, right? And she had an incredible work on the patterns and principles in order to govern commons. So John and myself from different backgrounds represent this braiding, this reconciliation of the principles of living systems, that is his work, and my proposal of understanding the patterns and principles of open source. And if you look at them, there's a beautiful overlap. Look, both look at holistic wealth, both are co-creative. I don't want to enter into the details of that, but the braiding of the natural laws and patterns and principles of living systems with the initial philosophy of Tim Berners-Lee, Paul Baran, Satoshi Nakamoto, Linus Torvalds, etc., can create enormous possibility for creating a new type of code, the code that is based on the patterns and principles of living systems. And the proposal is to bridge the TradFi to DeFi, but also a greater bridge to defining ReFi. ReFi is a regenerative financial system that runs on these 8 principles of regenerative vitality. Because human economies are so deeply embedded in society's biosphere that an excessive damage to one part just ripples apart the whole system. And finance has proved that left to its own during the last 50 years or more has demonstrated that it's extractive and it's affecting economy, society, and the biosphere as a whole. So is it possible to lever at this finance level to create a regenerative financial system with the technology that blockchain and your 3rd generation that Cardano brings in order to create a balance, right, to the whole human and biodiverse ecosystem? And I spent a couple of few minutes on this idea that Marshall McLuhan and Robert Logan brought. And it's the emergence of new languages as human civilization confronts complexity. Every time that a human system confronted complexity, it needed to create a new language. And from that new language co-evolve a new system of organization, a new culture, and a jump in awareness. This started, and today, what I'm proposing is that the 7th language of humanity is based on crypto. I don't know if that is the language name that is going to prevail, but that is the new language that is emerging. And let me go further into that concept. Today, humanity in this unbalance, in a single human psychological developing time frame of a decade, is confronting the adjacent possible. This collapse of the systems, the planetary boundaries, the AI technology, the singularity moment, these are, as Thomas Friedman said, a stampede of elephants stampeding towards us. It's not a black swan. It's a number of things that are coming into the limits, edges of a present state. And we need to create, and proposing a DARE that is this cockpit, this vessel or enterprise, that why there is called a decentralized autonomous regenerative enterprise that has the capacity of sense making, intelligence, and agency. We need to sense make this this moment and steer the system into a regenerative evolution. And we have in examples, life examples, this possibility of creating this new anthropological space of knowledge and collective intelligence. Bees has this capacity of emergence, and a single honeybee brain operates on a memory of 6 days, right? The hive operates on a memory of 3 months, twice as long as the average bee life. So this little bee goes and spots a beautiful flower 200 yards northeast, comes back, does that simple little dance, and that memory, after the bee dies, is there for at least 2 months. There's a space of emergence where that memory stays. The same with murmuration of starlings. They get together to exchange information of migration areas, routing areas, feeding areas, etc. There is an emergence there that these birds move in a flow that is 100th of a second. There's no way they could coordinate that beautiful dance. And collective intelligence, my proposal is based on this concept of joining together, interligieri, the construction not only of ideas, but of people constructing this new energy field. So as language goes, 200,000 years ago, the evolution of technology and language came together. Say that the group they are here, we needed to hunt a huge mammal. We had the spears, but if we didn't have the language to coordinate our activities, that was impossible, right? We needed 4 words: right, left, run, or now. And the spears evolved with the coordination. It became bigger, greater coordination, greater weapons. And this is autopoietic, it emerges, right? And this happened in Sumeria 5,000 years ago with the development of writing and math. And I'll give a simple example. One of you came with 2 bags of wheat. I had a hatch where you could keep the wheat, and we needed some accounting system, some coordination system, and I got a bit of water, a bit of mud, and I put, for example, Nori 2 bags of wheat. And in that act, math and writing came to being. But in a very short period of time, in Sumeria, we created the wheel, the sail, the arch, the concept of architecture, irrigation, farming implements, the concept of cities. We went beyond the number of 150 people living together. So now we needed a new system of organization. We created map, time, clocks, astronomy, drugs, etc. And then a couple of new languages came into existence: the language of science, the language of computer, the language of internet. All this is the theory of Marshall McLuhan and Robert Logan. And now we've gone through this digital realm, right, where until science, physics and chemistry were the way to understand the world. Now at this new era, computer and data science and algorithms are the way that we understand the virtual world. And some systems were unable to understand it. The last one is the Federal Reserve System that is still not understanding the emergence of this new crypto language and its possibilities. But as the adjacent possible comes forward, this new emergence of a language comes into being. It's hidden, secret, but at the same time, as with every other language, we had an evolution of awareness and consciousness and culture and organizational systems. At this time, there is an unseen, right, hidden, funny poiesis, a crypto, quantum leap in consciousness. And that consciousness is not only creating new systems of organization, and Frédéric Laloux has an incredible work of how these systems have emerged, right, since our initial tribes to armies, to the church, corporations. But now we are at this crucial point where culture and organizational systems are being redefined, they're being decentralized, and there's this new awareness and consciousness that is coming into being. So in the design of this new system, say it's emergent, say it's a hive mind that is beyond our capacity of little bees to understand it, the system will define that this language, in order to be sustainable in the future, it has to code the patterns and principles of living systems and the initial philosophy of open source, right? The system in itself as an overarching awareness and conscious umbrella is going deep into what does it really mean to be human, and what are the patterns and principles that need to be coded into this new emergent language. So regenerative economics is not a new name for sustainability. It's not a political philosophy for the left or right. It's not an environmental idea. It's based on three premises. The economy is a living system. There are patterns and principles that describe how living systems have sustained themselves. And our human economy, if it is to be sustainable, healthy as a whole over the long run, its system design must be aligned with these patterns and principles of living systems. And this means a new definition of wealth, right? Wealth is what Bucky Fuller defined, how now we can account wealth more precisely as the number of forward days for a specific number of people we are physically prepared to sustain at a physical stated time and space, liberating level of metabolic and metaphysical regeneration. And I have some more slides to share, but I think I'll stop here, probably to take some questions. And if we want to go into the details of how we are doing this or trying to do this, I'll share it with you. Wow, too much silence. Should I go on?
It's wow. I think you've blown us away with all this information. And I just see so many different connections between what you're doing and what we're doing, even with the Cardano for Climate group. Just absolutely incredible. And I hope you'll join our group. I'm going to send you a link. I feel like you have to be in it. You're speaking my language.
It's the language of life. It's the language and the patterns and principles of living systems. Mm-hmm. And that is coming centropically to embrace us. This is coming from the future. You have entropy that is causality, and syntropy that is retrocausality. Retrocausality is invisible, so it must come from the future, and this is what is bringing us together. Mm. If you want, I can go on with a couple of slides of what is our line of thought in order to put this together, and then we can have some questions.
You have a couple questions. I'll facilitate if you want. Gary, what did you have to ask?
Oh, I was just going to just echo. I think it was like a week ago what we were talking about. It was. Was it Café sur le Pont or something like that? Where we talked about the connection between the sun and photosynthesis and people and how the energy transfers from the sun via photosynthesis. The token system starts with tokenizing sunshine as sugar, inside that, let's say a raspberry, and then you eat it and it becomes you. And then you're animated, your intentions can turn into labor, can turn into production, creative production. And I just think that Cardano is such a beautiful, beautiful extension of nature. And if we just align ourselves with it and mirror nature, in how we create our incentive structure, I think it just comes down to inviting people, as you are, Ernesto, to continue to visualize this and say, how can we become just an extension of natural processes that are inherently anti-fragile, via Nassim Taleb, is the book that he wrote about just systems that become annealed through natural processes, like you were talking about, through drought, through heavy rain, through the winter, through all of this and the natural processes. You go out into nature. We go out into nature and explore nature And nature doesn't need us to meddle. It doesn't need us to tinker. And nature thrives without us. So how do we create systems that are just as robust, just as resilient, just as anti-fragile? Because, you know, our frame of reference, like you were mentioning with the Federal Reserve Bank, our frame of reference is our reality, and I'm saying reality in quotes, is a manufactured reality of tinkerers and wizards, you know, and they've tinkered their way into this pending catastrophic, cataclysmic mess that we're in with this fractional reserve banking system, where all this money has been created out of nowhere, and it's just basically debt slavery. And the concentration of you know, and I'm saying again in quotes, wealth and prosperity is in the hands of very, very few. And this pendulum is going to swing hard and fast. And so when we're creating these systems, the question I have, and this is the gazillion-dollar question, and this is the one that I struggle with, is what does it look like to invite people into this possibility, and how do we do it in a way that minimizes loss of life and property with the least amount of misery that is possible, as we're onboarding people into this new paradigm of decentralized, sustainable, equitable, inclusive future?
That is a very challenging question. I think it's going to get darker before it gets lighter. I think we are going into the depths of the dark valley before we start climbing the mountain again. In terms of onboarding with John, my partner, John Fullerton, we came to understand we both have between us more than 50 years of pinstripe suits, red ties, and suspenders of bulls and bears, right?
That's funny.
In very, very extractive positions. We were actually we had bought that model, right? And we were very good at doing that, right? But now we are bridges. In order to reconcile that world, I think it needs to be reconciled. I think regeneration, the first thing is reconciliation. It's reconciliation with ancient wisdom. It's reconciliation with the feminine energy. It's reconciliation with ourselves. It's reconciliation with nature. And I think both of us from that experience understand that this needs a transformative mind shift. It's not at the landscape where everybody is trying to do things. It's at the mindscape that we need to work. So we spent a year in an intention to understand how we change minds. And we came up with something simple. It's an introductory course to regenerative economics and finance. It's an 8-week course where we follow John Fullerton in his search of evolution towards understanding how we create a regenerative economic and finance system. It's through discovery dialogues that he has with thought leaders. I would love for him to have a discovery dialogue with Charles Hoskinson for us, to participants, to understand how the patterns and principles of living systems vision embraces the patterns and principles that Cardano has, or that ancient wisdom has, or some other thought leaders like Janine Benyus and her concept of biomimicry. So what we are proposing is the creation of an underlying community that has gone through a transformative learning experience. What I'm proposing for the creation of the DARE is that people that go through this, as they go through this process, they mint tokens of proof of knowledge. Today, I think we have the technology to mint the relationship that people have with others, with content, with regenerative behavior. Say we can incentivize the behavior around the 8 patterns and principles of living systems, in right relationship with yourself, with other, with the feminine, viewing wealth holistically, seeking balance, honoring community and place, empowered participation, creating this certification of knowledge, regenerative knowledge, that eventually can be triggered into proof of merit. Some sort of governance that if you have gone through a qualified learning experience, right, that you view the world through a regenerative perspective, now you can govern this new DAO, in this case, a DARE, that it only thrives if it collectively behaves with the patterns and principles of living systems in a governance model that is aligned with the holistic wealth of the aggregation of the behavior of people. That is the basic idea. I have no idea how to do it. I'm sure that you all have some idea, but the idea is to reconcile the old paradigm, our 50-year experience with, I'll send you a photo of myself with bull and bear suspenders, with this philosophy that has emerged in the last 5 or 6 years through Cardano.
Well, I would love to perhaps take this offline, but we should really connect, because one of the things that I'm interested in
Sorry, Gary, I'm gonna interrupt just because Nick's been waiting quite a while, and you may not be able to see that he's waiting with his hand, and I really apologize. I've been doing this at other ones. It feels very rude. Nick, you have a question, and then it's Noah. I'm just going to keep it going if you don't mind.
Okay. Gary, you can write in private and we can follow up if you want.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, I think like Gary brought up a good point. It's and Ernesto too. I mean, it's this frame of reference that we have to really identify that we're coming with. And I think in order to really identify this kind of altered perspective that we have, I think the root is go back to the wisdom keepers, the indigenous cultures who are living in this regenerative way. And there is a lot of wisdom there because, you know, I think the immediate thing is to like think about the sun, but the reality is if you look at these cultures, they were living in harmony with the feminine element of the moon too, you know, to where the Hopi and Chaco Canyon literally we're monitoring the 18.6 year cycle of the moon, and it's like how it comes up on the horizon and closes. And so that's actually where you get like it's a breath, and they would draw the sacred spiral because it would take 9 years to go out and 9 years to go in. So you have like a heartbeat and you have a breath, but it's coming from the sun and the moon. And so if we're going to mimic systems, we have to really go back to those indigenous roots in order to understand how altered our frame of reference is. Exactly. And I do think that the key is in the mandalas, because if you look at basically how you fractal out any natural system, it starts with an axis mundi, a center point. Yeah. And so all of the maps that are going to guide us, I think, are going to be in circular format, just like the indigenous had the medicine wheel, north, south, east, west. So you're going to really see that, because then that allows things to fractal out in natural ways or through biomimicry. And that core of north, south, east, west is just birth, life, death, rebirth. And that's what we've lost touch with, especially the death and rebirth we're resisting in our modern day culture. It's why we have so much hoarding in Wales. You know, like we had a governance talk recently. Oh, it's about the voting. And it's like, oh, well, we have all these wallets that can like veto or make a proposal right now. And we're just going to like, you know, square root them or quad root them or eighth root them, you know. And it's like, well, wait a minute, like where is that happening in natural systems? Why don't we create a token that, like a natural system, like an apple or a grain, has an expiration date so that there is no individual hoarding? I think we have to go all the way back that far to really start answering our questions. And I think we're going to find the answers in that story of where we're addressing this birth, life, death, rebirth, because just like Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, you know, many different cultures, many different myths, many different characters, one journey. Well, there's ultimately one journey of life on this planet. It's birth, life, death, rebirth. And if we can fit everything into that circular mandala, that axis, you know, with that axis mundi, then I think that is our compass to know if we're on the path, in order to basically be moving forward in a healthy direction.
Thank you, Nick. Actually, in this 8-week course, we're having one module, 1 week, that is called Timeless Wisdom. Initially was indigenous wisdom, but is something that is bigger than that, right? From many different cultures. And we're focusing that in order to open, each one of the modules is going to open a different course, right? Into regenerative finance, regenerative agriculture, and timeless wisdom.
Noah, you're up.
Hey, how's it going? So I thought that was a very interesting talk. I'm a biologist by training, and so there are some interesting points that I just wanted to point out. One, for example, is the definition of life. Life is that which is self-replicating, resists entering thermodynamic equilibrium. So it consumes energy and produces energy, and it itself is in an energetically unfavorable situation, and that which adapts and changes in response to environmental changes. And so what I thought was, one thing that I wanted to bring up was that we know from studying, all of life systems, from the fundamental level all the way up, is that all of these systems, what's fascinating about emergent properties, just to start with that, is that they all emerge in nature from a set of very simple rules. And those rules are generated by the requirements by organisms satisfying their requirements for life within the constraints of their present environment. And so you end up with a lot of heterogeneity because there are many sources for energy in order to avoid thermal equilibrium, in order to avoid energetic equilibrium. And it takes different modes of metabolism to extract that energy from the environments. And so then you end up with all of this vast diversity that we see life. And then you have a sort of random evolution of changes and accumulation of changes where you have different organisms imposing constraints on other organisms, and then those organisms evolving and changing in response to those constraints. So, but at every level, it's just a little simple set of rules with that each entity, each individual unit has a very simple set of rules, and they all just interact in order to create this much larger whole. So when it comes to these things, it's impossible to, another interesting property, and this comes from the research on the stochastic or the random, and people will call it chaos theory, is that it is impossible to predict in which way these systems, what equilibrium these systems will find or what they'll look like in the future. The only way to see what they'll look like is to experiment and to set up one of these little equations and watch it evolve. So I was wondering what types of experiments you were thinking about doing, what kinds of in that research, and whether or not you've come to a set of simple rules that you thought were compelling and you'd like to look into further.
I think the principles are a set of very simple rules that should be challenged, because we have the principles of governing the commons, which could be applied to managing human commons. But I think if I do this exercise, right? I get these 8 principles and I apply them to myself, my family, my community. What is it to view for holistic wealth, both for me and for my family? What is it to be in right relationship? And I think today, and probably we need some developer or coder that, and probably you're thinking of similar things, is, can we code to understand how the whole commons, the emergent, aggregates this individual simple efforts, right, of behaving regeneratively in this community according to these principles to create this emergence. The bee does a very simple dance, right? And that simple dance by the collective creates an emergent memory and the exact directions where that nutrient is. And if you look at it, it's a very simple instinct act. It's an algorithm that the individual does, the collective understands. There's nobody taking notes or preparing a PowerPoint to make a presentation. It's an invisible, a funny poiesis, like Nora Basin mentioned.
Well, no, wait, let me push back a little bit. You can watch you watch one bee learn from another bee. So you watch them actually give their presentation and teach the dance to another bee. So there's a systematic way in which they go through that process. I'm sorry, I just had to, but I take it the answer to my question might be no at this point, or
no. Sorry, repeat what do I have to say? No or yes?
Sorry, so I was wondering if you had specified any sort of set of simple rules and then evaluated a model based on how those rules play out in the long term.
The answer is no. We work with certain organizations and enterprises, and we advise them how to behave according to the principles, but there's nothing as a protocol or a certification in place.
So how do you choose what the principles are?
Those principles are a work of 15 years of John Fullerton, analyzing living systems and trying to come up with compass, which today is offered to be challenged. We are not saying these are the principles.
Thank you very much.
These are the principles that need to be.
Sorry, I just want to thank you.
Yeah. I think from humbleness, nobody can define today what the patterns and principles of living systems are. It's just to bring it into the agenda. It needs to be a collective design, because nature behaves that way. Unless you think God came with those principles and coined them in stone, which is not the case. Or maybe it is, I don't know.
Ken, it looks like you have a question.
Well, I guess what I was going to say is that there's a distinction between a set of rules that systems are built out of and a set of principles that you're trying to live by. So one of them is sort of a moral system, and the other one is like a set of building blocks that something is built out of. So it's like what Noah was talking about. It's sort of two totally different concepts, like compared to what you're talking about.
The question is if we can reconcile both, right, at the code level. How do we bring into the discussion of the development of your future codes, right, if it's possible, to have an experiment where we only thrive according to those principles, and what are the rules at the code level that we need to design in order to capture that? And I don't have the capacity to answer that question. I'm an old investment banker that has understood that we do not align ourselves with these principles. Sustainability is not possible. It's a regeneration process according to some principles that I think they are these. And I'm convinced that John has done an incredible work in order to put them together. but I think they're just coming into the agenda to be discussed.
The thing is, though, it's sort of opposed to the way that biological systems actually work. That perspective, because in a biological system, you don't have set rules. The rules that govern any individual organism's behavior is the constraints of the environment. And so if you're setting up the constraints of the environment, then you're dictating how the organism behaves instead of allowing organisms to behave within the constraints of the environment that already exists.
I have a feeling there's some formulas that we don't know yet. Because if you think about Fibonacci and him recognizing how the degree of a leaf on some plants is a specific percentage, there's a lot of things that we don't understand. Mycelium wasn't a conversation until recently. The Wood Wide Web was unknown. I think there's some levels of math and principles that we don't quite understand yet. But as we come together and collect our wisdom, it'll start making more and more sense. That's what I'm saying. And I'm sorry, I jumped in without lifting my hand.
Well, just to jump in there too, Melanie, I'll just jump into, I mean, Ken has a background in mathematics, so I think he was getting to that point. And I think that there are conversations about mathematics that we have talked about, and certainly Mandelbrot has developed mathematical structures and has applied them to finance in his book Misbehaving Markets. So I think that there's a lot of conversations that can be had. So I think over the last 20 years, there are mathematical structures that have been developed that could be applied. But I think also, and I will go on because then that would take us out of, I'm just responding to that, to your jumping in with what Ken was saying. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
And I just wanted to jump in because some of the comments related. I do think that there is, the organisms themselves, like in order for them to construct complicated entities, like ants creating ant mounds and bees creating beehives, and each individual unit has its own simple set of rules that it follows in order to create the collective structure of the thing as a whole. I think that just in general, it's incredibly powerful to derive inspiration from nature and how nature optimizes given an enormous variation in different types of constraints, and that you can, if you're interested in looking for a set of economic principles that will suit a particular situation, I think the animal kingdom and the diversity of ecology is a phenomenal place to look and see how it manages its energy economy. That's all.
Gary's waiting patiently, and Ernesto. And you did have another portion of your slides to present. And the other thing is you did mention a course, an 8-week course that I may have missed.
Yeah. Do you want me to just move forward with that a bit?
Gary, do you have more to add, or can Ernesto continue on with the slides?
Why don't you continue on with the slides, and if there's time at the end, then I'll just ask you a question.
Okay. So I think there is the need to bridge and reconcile and create a mind shift for those that are directing the financial capital flows and have the power and potential in order to create a regenerative process. So how do we change minds? Our proposal is to work, sorry, I'll get this out of the way. So at the Mind Shift, we had an event at the Lighthouse in Stonington, Connecticut, where thought leaders came together in order to redesign economics and finance. That's an ambitious statement, to think about how redesigning economics and finance. And we came up with this idea, and we filmed there this 8-week course that is going to be launched next fall. The third phase, and what we intend is for people to go through a transformative learning experience and create an underlying community of people that have unveiled themselves and see the world through regenerative perspectives, to truly understand what these principles are, to have case studies, for example, with companies like Patagonia, like Natura Cosméticos, one of the biggest cosmetic company in the world, like Guayaquil. I can give you specific of these companies that are regenerative in their intention, at least. I don't know if there is any regenerative company in the world right now. And the third phase is a third generation of courses, also to create a community dimension through regenerative agriculture, regenerative finance, regenerative travel, regenerative policy, etc. And from here, this phase 4, that is, how do we gather people that have gone through a transformative learning experience into collective efforts. And this is first, create a community, people that share values, share interests, share ideas, trustful relationships, and there create a knowledge system, a knowledge commons, and start experimenting with an underlying DAO called Decentralized Autonomous Regenerative Enterprise that runs on some sort of behavioral patterns and codes related to living systems. So people go through this transformative learning experience. As they go through this experience, they mint proof of knowledge tokens that eventually can be switched to proof of merit tokens in terms of creating this governance systems. In order to open a monetary portal to fiat money, as this hive mind analyzes companies according to these 8 principles, or organizations according to these 8 principles, we can aggregate that experience and provide advisory services to the mainstream world. To give you an example, Walmart has declared that it wants to be regenerative, so this hive mind could produce services in exchange for fiat money to advise Walmart and other companies on how to be regenerative. Simple example. All this run by the principles of regenerative economies and principles of open source. So, and here I'm entering into an area that I'm only by intuition. I have no experience in designing tokens, but I imagine that each token can be a trustful relational knowledge center aligned with behavioral purpose. It can be the registry of the historical flow of the cognitive and behavioral patterns in time and space, both for the individual and for the aggregate. And the capture of what I call warm data. This is data that people are willing to give. It's behavioral data, cognizance data, community connectedness, systemic integration, in a space with diversity, allurement, and shared values. So the emergence of this is through token distribution. Again, I'm entering into a space that you know more about. The underlying community has this proof of knowledge, this proof of merit, corporate governance, and the possibility of creating a decentralized autonomous regenerative enterprise. Some things that you know more about, what are tokens, what would be special purpose tokens, proof of knowledge tokens and proof of merit tokens. I don't need to go into this, but that there would be this new sense-making space for new ideas, new possibilities, new impulses, new meta frameworks, a systemic approach, collaborative by nature, synergic, and systemic transformation through our collective efforts in order to create this emerging energy field.
Wow. That's fantastic.
But again, this is a reconciliation. I'm here to bridge with your dimension, right? I have a lot of experience in being extractive, but I understand that the new paradigm is there. I've been able to cross the bridge, and I think our mission from this side of the paradigm is create the possibility of bridging your paradigm with ours. Bridges are constructed from the two dimensions. You cannot construct a bridge from one side. It needs to come together in a center, and that is what I'm calling reconciliation. How can we create this capacity of the think tank that we have that has worked on understanding the patterns and principles of living systems and working together with a coding dimension, with a new third generation or the future generation of blockchain technology in order to make this possible. We're starting with a course, but the idea is for that community eventually to become a DAO. And that's it.
So just food for thought, something to think about. One of the things that I'm interested in doing, kind of the next step that I'm interested in doing for the project that I'm working on in Minnesota, is to create a Cardano conference, which would have a three-pronged conference. One of the, I'm calling them, it's kind of a play on words. Instead of a tributary, I'm calling them contributaries, and it's contributaries to confluence. So all of these are different entities coming from different positions that are all creating basically the DARE that you're talking about. And the first one is the creative construction piece, because I'm actually working on creating a building that would be a Cardano acceleration portal. So it would be a Cardano acceleration portal experience. So the idea is to go from somebody who's an unconscious incompetent to an incubator. So someone who's a visitor, let's say at the Mall of America, and moving them from that to actually becoming an incubator, accelerating through and becoming literate in this system, and getting moving through this in a very, very rapid fashion with the proper education materials that would enable them to have the least amount of time and effort to get to the destination that they want to get to. So we're creating a portal to move people into this experience that you're talking about. So ultimately, I would like to have this creative construction piece, that's the physical part. Then there's the Cardano architecture part, which would be the second track. And then the third track in this 3-day summit would be everybody from the legacy system. So it doesn't matter where they're from. They could be from banking, from insurance, from government, from wherever. All the folks who are going to transition into this decentralized reality would cross-pollinate with the people who are on the cutting edge, that see the vision. That would be, potentially the people who would graduate from your program would share the possibilities of where we're going. So it's almost like using your idea about murmuration and bees, that we would become the bees, signaling to the other bees that are the legacy bees to say, this is the direction we're going. And you're invited to co-create the incentives that are going to move us there. So let's just say in Minnesota, we have US Bank, right? So what if US Bank was enrolled into the possibility of saying, take all that you know about lending, take all that you know about everything, all of your domain knowledge, and rather than assuming the position of the one who's going to be disintermediated, assuming the position of disintermediating yourself. How would you disintermediate yourself, knowing what you know now about Cardano and about decentralized finance? How would you become the peer-to-peer lender of the world?
Yeah.
And how would you serve other people?
That's why I mean by reconciliation. We have to reconcile with ancient wisdom, but we need to reconcile with the wisdom that it's out there of the old paradigm. We cannot just replace it with a new one. We need to find what is best and what it works of that knowledge, and braid it together with a new narrative, a new patterns and principles. The code is.
And I could see you leading that group of businesses and guiding them into this space, along with, because ultimately, I don't know if you've ever seen one of these things where somebody throws a bunch of paint on a canvas and you look at it and you go, I don't know what the heck that is. And then when they're finished, they flip it 180 degrees and it's Bob Marley.
Yeah.
Right. So that's what I would like to do in this conference, is say we've got these 3 different groups, and then at the end they all come together and you're like, oh my God, we just built this facility that's going to be a host to 40 million visitors who come in per year, and we're busing students in, and we're bringing them through this transformational experience and showing them a glimpse into the future where they can go through this portal and experience what a decentralized reality would look like. And then now we're bringing all of these businesses in a 3-day summit. I think that would be fabulous, and you would be fantastic leading that.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. We have an alignment of ideas. We have a number of companies already signed up for this course, sending people that they want ambassadors that change their vision and can come back with this new idea of a decentralized world. And that is
nice.
The idea, how we change minds of people of mainstream that go back to their own structures and challenge those structures, but they have these bridges to the hive mind that can help them, that can guide them in this process, because they are going to go through a very hard process in the next decade. It's inevitable. Or they collapse, or they reinvent themselves. And what we want to do is create bridges for that reinvention. And we need new type of leaders that go back and help.
The thing I was saying is that where you could accelerate it, where you could take your idea and take it even farther, is like if you, and I'm not saying it's my idea or this idea, but let's just say this summit, and you had all of this just fantastic energy, and people are having these epiphanies and all this in this energetic space. If you did a kind of a hybrid live event like the Cardano Summit, and you shared it with the world, now you have global exposure right out of the gate, and it's 3 days where you're just creating this massive pulse, like an electromagnetic pulse around the world, shifting people's consciousness in a very short period of time.
I love to experiment that. I don't know if it's possible to change massively yet. We're going to find the formula, but I would love to follow up on this.
When people see that they're on a sinking ship and someone else is showing them that there's life rafts off of the starboard side of the ship, everyone's going to the life rafts, right? So we're at a time right now where everyone, you're going to have people who have been working for 40 years dumping their money into a 401k kill box, where there's no way they can benefit from going short on anything. And when that stock market tanks and all of their life savings disappears, and they lose 80% of their life savings, people will be interested in moving to whatever system is fair and equitable and inclusive and is going to offer them hope. Because in hopelessness, any light, any spark, anything is going to be welcomed by people who are going to be just filled with hopelessness.
But it's not life rafts, it's bridges that we have to build.
Exactly. I completely agree.
Although I do think that. I mean, I think if we really realistically look at that bigger picture, powers that be that want to remain in power are going to be sending out life rafts. Like, and so like you said, Gary, I think people are going to be like freaked out and going to any system and not necessarily making correct decisions. So when the governments or whatever is saying like, oh, well, here, just, you know, suckle this teat by getting all registered over here on this centralized blockchain with this centralized digital currency that sounds the same, like people are not going to know the difference. So I do think there is a distinction that needs to be made between life raft and building bridges, because it's going to be real confusing for people. And I think ultimately that, yeah, like darkness before it gets better. And like, how do we even shift that? Like, how do we even offer those people in power or these people with huge amounts of wealth, you know, maybe a way to like help facilitate that transfer? I think ultimately it comes down to desires and fears. You know, like what is it we ultimately desire? What is it we ultimately fear? And like really grinding down to that essence and finding ways to build bridges between those, both between the haves and the have-nots, that will allow both sides to be able to move closer and closer to each other. And yeah, so I did kind of want to like, yeah, talk about that whole desires and fears. I think that that's how we almost even avoid it getting like super, super dark, is like, we need to be prepping on our own side to be building these bridges. And I think that's the bridge. Like those are the anchor points for your bridge on either side, is understanding desires and fears from everybody's perspective. You know, that's why I like to look at archetypes and look at different socioeconomic statuses and everything like that. And I do think that we really do need to have the indigenous wisdom here. And if we need help bringing that indigenous wisdom, because the reality is I didn't even understand it until I lived down with these people, like in the Sacred Valley of Peru, like what it meant for North America to remove these people from land, you know, because me growing up, it's like, oh, I just changed house. Like I moved states when I was a kid. It's no big deal. But no, these people live literally in integration as an ecosystem, not separate from their environment that they're living in. And that's what makes it regenerative in a lot of ways. And I never really understood that until being able to live with them. And that's where that true wisdom comes from. And that side of the story needs to be there for this, I think, truly to be successful, because I definitely see, yeah, like I think there's benefit to these principles, but I don't want these principles to just be another like certification system, like organic, that gets like put on top and then whitewashed over. You know what I mean? Like that's gonna happen. So we have to plan for it. And I think part of to compensate for that is like getting these indigenous wisdom keepers at the table, and they're willing to come and speak and talk, and then just some ideas, and like maybe just end with a story is, you know, and I wasn't quite following all the way through. I'd love to maybe study the slides a little bit more, that whole tokenization, but that would be my big fears. There's a lot of like linear based pictograms there instead of what I would see as regenerative, which is circle based. And so, you know, there is some fear in there for me. I need to understand this a little better. But ants are actually perfect ideas of syntropy, because they don't like get up in the morning and then like meet with the manager and be like, okay, you're going out northwest, you're going out southwest, east, and you're going out, you know, to like find for food. They literally just like randomly start going. They run up against the environment. There's a rock, so he turns whichever way, but they're leaving a scent trail. And then what happens is they find a piece of food, and then they follow their own scent trail back. And then what happens is another ant crosses that trail and says, oh, this is a double up scent trail, so I know there's food and I know which direction. So boom, I go to the food. Now it's a quad scent food. Now another ant finds it. Now it's like, you know, times 8. Now it's so I think that's also the difference between, I think what maybe Noah or even Ken and stuff like that was trying to talk about, is difference between like applying principles as like a hierarchical knowledge-based system versus like what are just the like basic core building blocks that actually allow what seems like chaos to really not necessarily work like chaos. It works in this beautiful centrifugal way.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I don't think I have an answer. I'm just grounding what you said.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all discussion, right? I mean, it's all, that's why I think right now it's more important to have the right people at the table, and maybe even like overcompensate there, and just talk about that environment, and make sure we have that dialogue, especially before we start like stamping out, you know, ideas, and especially like autonomizing it, you know, or putting it into like some directed AI that's non-changeable. So let's make sure we kind of understand some of these previous steps, I think, in the beginning.
And I think some of our tendency is to want to come up with a solution, right? Let's we need a solution,
right?
Rather than engage in a journey of, you know, it's that kind of the creating. I forgot who was it, Martha, who was someone was just talking about math and Mandelbrot, and you know, if you look at the kind of the idea of a self-similar fractal, what we're doing is we're kind of create, what is the fractal? What's the fractal? What's the fractal of the system that's going to create this regenerative system? And I think the only way to get there is through experimentation, right? So if you say, here's some incentive, we're going to do this is this incentive thing, and then at what point does it require human intervention? And you go, okay, now it's broken. All right, well, how can we tweak it so it requires less and less and less human intervention, that the process of incentives have fewer and fewer gaps, that we anneal over time, that we, you know, kind of, that the fragility is kind of eliminated over time, and the robust and resilient pieces live, and the things that are fragile and require a lot of intervention end up failing. And I think that's how nature over time, I mean, we're talking millions of years that these, or who knows, maybe longer, that it's taken for nature to become what it is. And we're thinking 6 months, you know, 8 months, a year. I mean, it's crazy if we think we're going to replicate exactly what nature is doing on its own without human intervention. We're just going to create this system that's going to work right out of the gate. So we have to be willing to make mistakes, and just have intentions that are aligned in such a way that we can operate from a place of love, from a place of abundance, from a place of you know, creating a system that's going to live basically without our intervention.
I think you use a word that in last Saturday, Nick and you were in the cafe, and it's intention. I think if we put the intention to do it, that is a major disruption in human thought. I don't know if we'll be able to achieve it in our lifetimes, but if we put our purest intention in designing this with the purest principles that we can find, I think that is an energy portal, a knowledge portal, a spiritual portal that I think would create a disruption at the collective level. We need that. We need this narrative at this point in time. We need this new story to have something.
So,
yeah.
So if you're kind of going on that, the intention that one of the intentions I was talking about in our previous conversation was what Thich Nhat Hanh was talking about when he was saying that we're called to love other people in such a way that you feel free. So could you build a system where other being in a way that felt free, so that if the three things we control are setting an intention, taking an action, and letting go, that the process of letting go is actually an offering of love. So then letting go is no longer around suffering. Letting go is about honoring other people and their free will.
Yeah.
right? So we can set an intention, and the intention in this case what is invite people into a possibility. So as a community, crafting that possibility of creating a dare or multiple dares or whatnot, and then taking the action that's congruent with the intention. So the action would be, let's come together for planning sessions for blah, 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 whatever we're doing, like we're doing right now, and having more and more and more of those. And then everything else after that is letting go. And we just keep setting the same intention, or setting an intention, taking an action, and keep building and keep building, keep building. And we're going to make mistakes. We're going to have missteps. We're going to misfire. And this is an infinite game that we're playing, and this system is going to mature way beyond our time on this planet.
Exactly. It's there's no guarantee of success. There's no guarantee we're going to see it, but there's a certainty it's going to be incredibly difficult, and probably is one of the biggest challenges humanity has ever faced in its existence.
But it's a great game to play.
It's an infinite game. That is the rules of the infinite game.
Yes, love that. I'm down for the infinite game.
Like James Cars, we should bring James Cars into the conversation. Incredible book. Listen,
yeah.
I need to jump to another call in 4 minutes now. So,
okay. I was going to say there was somebody else with their hand up. I saw Tajini. I don't know how to pronounce your name. I'm so sorry. Tajini.
I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts, Tajini.
Oh, Tajini. Thank you. Thank you.
I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but thank you.
I didn't understand the question. Sorry. For who it was.
We were just encouraging Tajini to share their question.
Okay.
Because they had their hand up for a while.
Yeah, if you're speaking, we can't hear you, Tajini.
She has a problem with the mic. So you can write it down. If you hear it, you can write it down.
And I just wanted to say, I do think the other key word for me is emerging. Almost going back to that ant reference, it's like we really just need multiple emerging spaces. And maybe always in thinking of these terms of how do we support it, like, well, how do we also get out of our own way so nature can just take its natural course, what ways are we blocking that natural, path to say all of a sudden, this is popping up and people think it's cool and this pathway starts to form naturally, let's just let it. But I do think we have to find a way to support emerging spaces and not just iterative spaces that are problem solution focused.
You're completely right. How do we create conditions for emergence? What are the underlying conditions? Because we can create those conditions. We cannot trigger emergence, but we can strive in order to create the possible conditions for emergence. And I think that is probably our nicest challenge, right?
Yeah.
So I really need to leave in the hour. But I posted my email here. I'm available for anything you need. I would love to continue this, as again, this is the extension of this side to construct the bridge. And probably I would love to find your architect on the other side that wants to construct from that side and define what is the middle ground and how do we construct this.
And we can email you about this course you were talking about?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, please, and I'll give you some ideas. It's been launching next fall, but I would love, there's going to be a huge group of the old system attending. That is our intention, to change the minds. But there's going to be a lot of interaction at the community level and challenges that I would love that for your community to come together and embrace some emergence, create a space for those energy fields coming together to create some emergence there.
Thank you for this presentation.
No, thank you for your time, and my contacts are open for anything that you need. This is where I'm putting my intention and my energy, and I think this.
Please come back and do other breakout rooms before the next fall. You know, it'd be lovely to come back.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And please, if I don't know what this recording is going to be, if anybody knows, please share it with me, and I would love to listen to your comments and trigger more thought. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yep. See you guys.